My name is Jonathan. I've never felt such intense anger in my life before. This anger is something no one should ever experience. At that moment, I had a strong urge to physically do bad things to people. You might be wondering what caused this rage in me. Let me explain. It all began about 5 weeks ago when my wife and I noticed a significant change in her behavior, like a chameleon's transformation. She started showing a lack of closeness, even the usual actions between a husband and wife. This sudden change made me suspicious, as my past experiences with my ex-girlfriend had taught me some tough lessons about trust and truth. Interestingly, I had never mentioned the first girl in my life before, and I doubted that revealing it would have made any difference. As her behavior continued to change in the second week, I felt the need to investigate further. Unlike those who seek outside help for their problems, I'm not someone who relies on others. I prefer to solve my problems on my own. So, during my lunch break, I discreetly followed her from work. To my surprise, she parked at a motel and entered room 104. My gut told me she was cheating on me. It didn't make sense because her job didn't involve client interactions, and she worked in the accounting department. Discovering her infidelity hurt, but not as much as the emotional stress I'd already endured from her insults and rejections. The person she was having an affair with turned out to be a colleague, even though they worked in different departments. There were rumors that he was moving up the ranks in the company. For 2 weeks, I thought about various ways to solve the problem. Eventually, I decided on a direct approach to avoid spending money confirming what I already suspected. I waited patiently for the moment I knew she was with another man behind that door. Despite the strong temptation to confront her violently, I reminded myself not to resort to cruelty. My main goal was to gather evidence. In my current emotional state, I still had the option to take legal action for the loss of love, which would have serious consequences for both my wife and her employer. I had a feeling that the man she was involved with was on the brink of a downfall, and events would unfold accordingly. My main task was to gather the necessary evidence and serve divorce papers to my soon-to-be ex-wife. At the same time, the locks in our house were being changed by a locksmith I had hired earlier. I had also organized our finances for an equal division, and I canceled all our credit cards. The past 2 weeks were filled with preparations, and the final shock was approaching. As for Simone's reaction, I can't predict it with certainty. I believe she will find happiness and may eventually feel guilty. My lawyer, experienced in divorce cases, assures me that this guilt will fade once she has her own lawyer. Regarding my feelings for her, one might wonder if I still love her. At the moment, I feel nothing but hatred for her. Yet, I struggle internally, wondering if she genuinely loves me or if her actions are a mistake in resolving the issue. I have a faint hope of restoring our relationship, but logically, I know it's unlikely. I can't accept a wife who betrayed my trust through infidelity. My confidence in her is completely shattered, and the love I still have for her is a remnant struggling to cope with this rapid change. The motel manager gave me the room key after I handed him a $100 bill and promised not to disturb the peace. Even though my wife and her lover chose this place for their secret meetings, I don't blame the manager. He seems like a genuinely nice person. Interestingly, he mentioned his ex-wife, and there were certain similarities in our situations. I quietly opened the door with the key, entered the room, and left it slightly ajar. I grabbed a digital camera, thankful for receiving it as a birthday gift 3 months ago. I admired its quality, but was quickly captivated by the scene before me. She was pleading with the man to let her go, and he was visibly angry as he tried to get up. I decided to capture the evidence, taking a few more pictures as I witnessed her suffering. Simone had tears streaming down her face, trying to hide from him while he continued his disgusting actions. I mentally wished that he would make the wrong move, so my instincts would guide my actions. He demanded to know my identity and warned of physical confrontation. I replied that I was the soon-to-be ex-husband of the woman he was having an affair with. It remained uncertain whose face would be punched. I doubted he could do bad things to me. As he approached me, I shifted to the side, gently put the camera down, and turned slightly to the right to let him approach from the left. Loosening my grip on the camera, I began to turn quickly, raising my hand forcefully. When my fist met his face, he was lifted off the ground by a mix of anger, pain, and trembling. At that moment, I couldn't believe I'd let myself get so needlessly angry. but it seemed like my emotions had overwhelmed my rational thinking. I bent down and checked if he showed any signs of life. When I found a pulse, I felt relieved, which allowed me to relax my tense body for a moment. During this time, I heard Simone talking incessantly. Her words filled the air around us. When I looked at her, I saw that she had suddenly stopped, her voice now muted by fear. It dawned on me that she had never seen this side of me before, this raw and unrestrained version of myself that had been unleashed. I must have looked nothing like the person she saw at breakfast. It was clear that she had betrayed me, and I didn't want anything to do with her cheating anymore. Tears rolled down her face. She sat trembling, hugging herself tightly and avoiding eye contact. She couldn't bring herself to meet my gaze. This behavior had become more common lately, but in that moment, she realized I knew about her actions. The game was up. I noticed a flicker of fear in her eyes when she glanced at me, but she quickly looked away. I informed her that I was filing for divorce, changing the locks in the house, and setting up a bank account with her share of our property. I had given her official notice, making it clear that our relationship was over, and I expressed my gratitude for her lack of contribution. I placed the papers on her lap as she tried to hide under the sheets. She briefly glanced at them and then met my eyes. No words were exchanged. In that moment, an unusual emptiness filled the room, but it was clear that my emptiness would be more painful. She realized that no words could mend the situation between us. It seemed she didn't know how to fix our broken relationship, and it had been deteriorating for longer than just the last few weeks. I turned and left, despite her desperate pleas echoing behind me as I walked out the door. "Wait, let me explain. Please, Jonathan, please." I kept walking, deciding to shield myself from her gaze. Her eyes were filled with unshed tears, and I knew that turning around would weaken my resolve and disrupt my plan. Numerous unresolved issues and problems had cropped up along the way, making me reluctant to revisit the past. What was once a beautiful union had turned to ashes. When I arrived home, a patient locksmith was waiting for me. He diligently replaced all 3 locks on our doors and reprogrammed the garage door opener. I thanked him for his prompt service and slipped him a $1.20 bill as a token of appreciation. Sitting at the kitchen table, a place that used to hold fond memories of a loving home, I reflected on the years spent together. Simone's abrupt change remained a mystery to me, as did her disregard for the qualities she had once acknowledged in me. I couldn't grasp her motivations, but I knew our relationship had crumbled in just 5 weeks. Pain and hurtful words had transformed me into a completely different person. Unfortunately, Simone seemed oblivious to this change, just as I had been unaware of her changes. Suddenly, the phone interrupted my thoughts. Glancing at the caller ID, I saw it was Simone's mom. I answered and greeted her. I identified myself as John. To my surprise, Simone's mother, Doris, told me that Simone had come to her in tears, confessing that she had somehow ruined our marriage. "Curious," I responded. I explained to Doris that the situation was a bit complicated, and Simone would need to explain what happened today. I mentioned that I found her in a motel room and served her with divorce papers. Doris expressed her confusion and said she didn't understand what was happening between us. I conveyed my genuine sorrow to Doris, telling her that I cared a great deal about her and Sam, and that this situation was undoubtedly tough for all of us. I also mentioned that it seemed that things had to turn out this way. Tears welled up as I spoke these words. I held a deep affection for Simone's parents, who had shown me kindness throughout the years of our relationship. Doris's anguish and confusion cut through me. I was relieved that we were having this conversation over the phone. I didn't want them to see me like this. I responded to Doris, expressing my doubts about finding a way to work things out. I continued by emphasizing to Doris that this was a serious issue, a really serious one. The gravity of the situation was causing a rift, and the silence on the other end of the phone suggested that Doris was having a hard time processing this distressing information. I felt empathy for her. Just the previous night, I had shared dinner with Doris, Sam, and Simone had been affectionate and gentle in the presence of her parents. The entire situation had taken me by surprise. When we were driving there, we were arguing. On the way back home, I encountered a distant attitude from John, which wasn't surprising. During the time we spent with Doris and Sam, we portrayed ourselves as the perfect couple to spare Sam from the pain caused by our issues. In hindsight, I should have somehow warned them before taking the steps I did. Sam's health was already fragile due to years of hard work and smoking, which had taken a toll on him. Although Doris was in good health, she was constantly worried about Sam. I deeply regret not letting them know about our troubled situation. A few days later, I received a call from Simone's father, who explained that he needed to discuss something important about his daughter's troubled relationship. He mentioned that Simone had confided in her mother the previous night, and he had been present during their conversation. He asked if we could arrange a meeting to discuss what she had gone through. Due to my strong affection for Simone's parents, I readily agreed to the meeting. During our conversation, Simone's father shared the details of her conversation with her mother and relayed it to me. He expressed his regrets for me serving her with divorce papers and requested that Simone provide more details about what had transpired. He felt that simply stating that I found her in a motel room wasn't sufficient. He wanted to understand why she was there and who she was with. Simone began explaining, saying that our relationship had deteriorated compared to when we first got married, primarily due to my overwhelming workload with numerous projects. She had discussed this issue with her mother, who believed that my hard work would eventually lead to a well-deserved promotion. Simone continued, revealing that there was more to the story at her workplace. Greg, a colleague, had discovered a few mistakes she made in the employee records. While these weren't major errors, they were significant enough to jeopardize her chances of a promotion, a salary increase, and hinder her advancement in the company. Exploiting the situation, Greg essentially blackmailed her into having a closeness encounter with him, despite her reluctance. She decided to take that step to avoid the consequences of her mistake. This was a result of our ongoing relationship difficulties and lack of closeness over the last 6 months. Simone also explained that it was only after that first encounter with Greg that she realized her eagerness to experience what others had already enjoyed. I had been her only partner, and she'd never been with anyone else. She detailed the first closeness moment with Greg, which took place in his office during a lunch break. Everyone else had left, and she stayed behind. Greg surprised her with a small bottle of her favorite wine, along with cheese and crackers. She noted that typically, lunch breaks lasted an hour, and everyone would go to nearby restaurants or street vendors for food. However, she preferred a quick snack from a food cart and going to the park, and surprisingly, no one noticed their absence. Simone shared that Greg turned out to be much kinder than her initial impression of him as a stern blackmailer. This meeting marked a turning point for me, causing me to let go of my preconceived notions about him. Although I knew it was morally wrong, I found myself desiring more of those forbidden moments. While I still loved my husband, Greg treated me in a way that made me feel like his possession, and with him, I shed my inhibitions and became a completely different person. By the end of lunch, I was engaging in things with Greg that I hadn't even considered with my husband. We barely wrapped things up before others returned. As I left his office, my anger towards him had somewhat dissipated. That day, with the taste of him on my lips, I couldn't shake the thought of our next encounter. This thought came unexpectedly. Recognizing my desire for Greg, he also desired more than just a one-time encounter. The next day, Greg approached me to discuss it, and we had another closeness moment in his office. During that encounter, I noticed that Greg spoke negatively about Jonathan. These subtle insults continued for the following 2 weeks when we were together, and Greg even suggested that Jonathan might be unfaithful. Given the situation in our personal life at home, it didn't take me long to adopt Greg's negative view of Jonathan. In the weeks that followed, I noticed myself starting to criticize and belittle Jonathan in front of everyone, except for you and Dad. Deep down, I was afraid that you both would catch on to my behavior, so I tried to keep up the appearance of a devoted and loving wife when you and your father were around. But as time passed and our meetings at the motel became more frequent, my relationship with Jonathan deteriorated, while my relationship with Greg transformed from a simple closeness affair into a full-blown romance. Greg suggested continuing our meetings at the motel as a temporary solution until we found a better option. He explained that his wife was becoming suspicious, possibly because someone at work mentioned how often we were seen together. Even though we worked in different departments, there was no talk of parting from our spouses. Our meetings were purely for physical closeness. Looking back, I failed to recognize the love, respect, and understanding that Jonathan offered me. I chose a relationship based on attraction and desire over the emotional connection I had with my husband. I surrendered myself to Greg without much resistance. Jonathan always treated me with respect, never taking anything without my full consent. Greg, on the other hand, had no emotional attachment to me, allowing him to take control freely. He had a compartment where he satisfied his desires, and his wife provided emotional support. I took Greg's negative comments about Jonathan seriously, which led me to prefer an exciting, closeness relationship with Greg over nurturing an emotional connection with my husband. Looking back, I realized that 10 weeks ago, I made the gravest mistake of my life, and sadly, it's no longer possible to undo it. When Jonathan entered the room on that fateful day, I was shocked and tried to hide desperately. I pleaded with Greg to stop, but when Greg finally stepped back and left the bed, I looked into Jonathan's eyes and saw a complete stranger in him. His behavior was tense and unusual. Without saying a word, Jonathan began taking pictures of us, and Greg, muttering something unintelligible, carelessly placed the digital camera on the nearby table. I was completely shocked by what happened next. Greg, consumed by anger, aggressively attacked Jonathan. But moments later, I saw Greg thrown into the air and collapsing on his back. I met Jonathan's eyes, and shame overwhelmed me, making it impossible to maintain eye contact. I tried to shield myself from the situation, covering myself with a sheet in an attempt to hide. At that moment, Jonathan used hurtful words, calling me corrupt, and casually placed several folded papers on the bed. In the midst of all this chaos, I heard that I had been served with divorce papers. My eyes remained fixed on the sheets, and I couldn't grasp that my husband's anger would soon be directed at me. Fear and humiliation coursed through my veins, making me tremble and feel vulnerable. Filled with shame and regret, Jonathan abruptly turned and headed for the exit, clutching the camera he took from the table. Desperately, I tried to reach out to him, but I was in tears. Although I don't recall the exact words, I felt that everything I said sounded empty. After this unpleasant encounter, I took a long shower, completely ignoring Greg's well-being. At that moment, it didn't matter to me whether he was alive or not. Soon, the motel manager peered into the room and said that Jonathan had purchased a key from him. The manager's disdainful look made me feel like I was beneath him. He spoke about how he found his wife with another man, much like my situation with Jonathan, and that was the main reason he gave Jonathan the key. He didn't need to explain it directly. I understood everything. I had made a colossal mistake. I foolishly lost the most precious thing in my life because I got carried away by a fleeting affair, believing it was something extraordinary. The next day, I went to work, and 3 men were waiting for me in my office. The president, the HR manager, and what I assumed was the company's lawyer. They wanted to avoid legal problems, so they offered me a settlement and let me go. It was an unpleasant situation, but at least it was over. Greg and I no longer communicated after that. It became clear that our relationship was built on deception and manipulation. I learned a tough lesson and vowed never to let anyone take advantage of me like that again. When I left the office, I felt a sense of relief. I might have lost my job, but I had regained my self-respect. From that day on, I resolved to be more cautious and selective about the people I allowed into my life. As for Greg, he would forever serve as a painful reminder of a chapter in my life that I was glad to leave behind. I received a severance package, and that was it. Greg was escorted out of the building by security and handed over to the police. It turned out he was involved in several other serious cases that came to light during the investigation. Greg had significant legal problems, including theft from the company through various means, such as embezzlement and falsifying business trip receipts. These actions added up to a grand theft charge. As a result, Greg's wife decided to leave him. After a difficult decision, they moved with their 3 children to her parents on the East Coast. Meanwhile, Greg remained in jail awaiting trial. Initially, I was asked to testify, but after discussions with the district attorney's office, it was clear that my testimony could do more bad things than good. So they decided not to involve me in the trial. Afterward, Greg's attorney approached me, seeking my testimony to support his client. However, as I recounted the details of how Greg had coerced me into a closeness relationship and manipulated my marriage, The attorney also concluded that my testimony wouldn't be helpful in court. Simone expressed her regret, saying, "Mom, I can't believe I messed up like this." Her mother responded sternly, telling Simone that she had made an incredibly serious mistake. She explained that Simone had not only let down her parents and herself, but had also betrayed her husband, hitting rock bottom. Despite all this, her mother conveyed that she still loved Simone because she's her daughter, but she had lost all respect for her. Sam told me that Doris and he had allowed Simone to stay with them. His voice carried a tone of complete confusion. Hearing this news brought tears to my eyes. I felt for these genuinely good people who found themselves entangled in this unfortunate situation. In retrospect, I had hesitated to inform Simone's parents because I knew it might lead to her getting a warning that could hinder me from gathering the necessary evidence. However, the photos I had didn't hold the key to the court case unless her lawyer decided to take an adversarial approach. In that scenario, I had 6 reliable witnesses prepared to testify about their involvement. Although I used the term affair cautiously, it remained unclear whether Simone genuinely loved this guy or if she willingly engaged in this situation from the very start. This ambiguity was connected to her father's previous remarks, suggesting that Greg had a certain level of influence over Simone right from the beginning of their relationship. Meanwhile, my attorney was handling the case with Simone's employer. As I got ready for a visit to the motel room, my lawyer had already filed the case in court. Surprisingly, within just 20 minutes, he was on the phone with the company's legal department. Their response was mixed, initially delighted, and then in denial. Naturally, the conversation took a different turn when he mentioned the affidavit. Suddenly, the company's stance on the issue shifted completely. Based on the information my lawyer shared, it was highly likely that Simone, her lover, and all others involved would be dismissed from their jobs the next day, unless they could provide a reasonable explanation for their actions. I personally understood that the case against Greg for alienation of affection had significantly strengthened due to his employer's response. We had affidavits from 3 of his colleagues and 1 from her, all attesting to their clandestine activities during work hours. The company's higher-ups had suspected their actions in secret but hadn't confronted them. We had sworn statements from the motel owner and the cleaning lady, totaling 6 witnesses. Additionally, I had photographic evidence confirming closeness activity during work hours. Their motel visits were to avoid drawing the attention of colleagues, as Greg noticed their behavior was becoming too conspicuous. He was well versed in the company's workplace relations policy. My attorney gathered a substantial amount of information, and we even had a printed copy of their company's ethics, actions, and workplace relations policy. It was during this time that I discovered Simone's affair, which had lasted just over 5 weeks before I became suspicious. By the time I encountered them at the motel, Simone had been unfaithful to me for 10 weeks. The revelation of their affair 5 weeks prior was an incredibly challenging period in my life, and was one of 3 similar moments that stirred strong emotions in me. I genuinely hoped I'd never go through such an experience again. When I left the motel room that day, I felt a sense of calm like I had never felt before. Simone lay on the bed, tears streaming down her face, while Greg remained unconscious on the floor. In the hallway, the motel manager approached me. As he handed me the key, he placed a reassuring hand on my shoulder. "It's tough now, but it will get better. Take time to rediscover yourself, and eventually you'll find someone new," he comforted me. "Everything will be okay." He didn't sugarcoat it, acknowledging that the healing process would be painful and depend on the depth of my love and care for her. "Thank you," I responded, indicating that I had already come to understand this. Simone offered no resistance during the divorce process, making it surprisingly straightforward. Even my attorney and possibly hers were surprised by her lack of opposition. It was clear that she was in great pain, but she never attempted to justify her actions. Once the divorce was finalized, the legal battle with her former employer swiftly concluded. Their sole aim was to make me disappear, and they were willing to cover my lawyer's fees, court costs, and even offer a significant sum to secure my agreement. But since then, Simone has faced numerous challenges. Navigating her circumstances is incredibly difficult, especially living with parents whose lives have been greatly affected by her actions. She bears the burden of seeing herself as an imposter, and it will undoubtedly take her a long time to shed that label. Although she has the opportunity to start anew, I hope that eventually she'll be able to move forward and rebuild her life, easing the pain that currently consumes her every hour. I want her to at least learn a valuable and painful lesson from this experience. Only time will tell the extent of her growth. As for Greg, his imprisonment provides me with a sense of satisfaction, at least temporarily. Maybe now he'll have the opportunity to experience different forms of closeness, hopefully this time from the recipient's side. I can't find any sympathy for him because I don't consider him a real man. It was clear to me that he had a family, a wife, and 3 children. I got to know his wife closely during a tumultuous divorce, and I couldn't help but notice her striking appearance. It struck me how foolishly Greg was behaving. He had everything anyone could wish for, but he recklessly threw it all away, driven by some insatiable desire for satisfaction in his closeness life that his wife couldn't fulfill. After witnessing this, I made a difficult decision to leave my job. My employers were shocked by my abrupt departure and genuinely tried to persuade me to reconsider. However, the personal problems I was facing were too serious and hindered me from effectively continuing my work, despite their best efforts. When they realized my decision was final, they kindly provided a generous letter of recommendation, which I gratefully accepted. I recently started a new job on the West Coast, having moved here about a year ago. While working here, I had the pleasure of meeting a wonderful woman who, in my opinion, is worth holding on to. Though I still have trust issues, we share a common experience, as she was also betrayed by her ex-husband. This shared experience has created a strong bond between us. Life, of course, presents its challenges and teaches me valuable lessons, but I remain optimistic that the situation is gradually improving. A week ago, Simone's father called me with devastating news that I still can't come to terms with. He said that Simone had completely lost her way, and they soon discovered Simone's lifeless body in their own home. It later came to light that she had taken too many pills, resulting in her passing. I expressed my sympathy to Sam and assured him they could count on my support.